In this video, we're going to select an item from our shop, and then based on the shop selection, what we can then do is pass that back to the code and update the UI manager to update this little selection bar. So how do I know if I select the Flame Sword or the Boots of Flight or Key to Castle? Well, if we look here on the selection or of those individual buttons, you'll see here that each one is calling that selection script. Well, what if we added a parameter to the selection script to know which one we clicked? So if I go into my shop code here, we're calling this select item function. What if we passed in a parameter value that we could keep track of? Let's call it int selection. So here, int item even. So basically what we can do here is we can signify that 0 equals, we'll say 0 equals Flame Sword, 1 is going to equal Boots of Flight, and then we'll say 2 is going to equal Key to Castle. Let's save this. And what we can do now is through the inspector here, on each one, it's going to allow us to pass in a parameter that the code represents. So if we select our canvas and select one of our buttons, the Flame Sword button, you'll see here that we are going to add our shop, and then we're going to call our select item. Now when I call that function, check this out, it's looking for a value. So Flame Sword is going to be 0, Boots of Flight is going to be 1, so shop, select item, we're going to pass in a 1, and then Keys to the Castle is going to be a 2. So here we have our shop, select item, and it's going to be a 2. Now what's going to happen is every time we click one of these, it's going to also call that function and pass in that value, and that value is going to be stored here. So what we can do is we can say select item, and then let's get whatever item we hit. So plus item. We'll save this, head back into Unity, and now when we select an item, it's going to print out the corresponding value so that through code, we know which one the player selected. Let's go ahead and run this. You'll see here if I hit Flame Sword, it says selected item 0. If I hit Keys to Castle, selected item 2, and Boots of Flight is selected item 1. Using this information, we can then talk to the UI manager to update the UI placement of this. So one thing that we can do here is let's get the position of where the selection needs to be for each one. So if we select Flame of Sword, we are basically going to update the rec transform Y position. So it's going to be 53 here. It's going to be negative 67 there. And it's going to be a negative 159 there, right? So that's what we want to do. So let's go ahead and make it so that we can actually modify that value now based on the information received. So we know what information is received. And what we can do now is we can switch between the values received. So we know which item we're passing in. So one thing that we can do here is we can create a switch statement. So we're going to switch between item. So, and if it's, you have your cases. So case 0 is going to be Flame Sword and so forth. And then based on that, we need to then communicate with our UI manager. We have to then communicate with the UI manager, and we need to update the position of this guy. So we're going to say public void update selection. We'll say update shop selection. And we're going to pass in an item. So here we're going to pass in an item ID. And we'll be able to then, based on that, or actually based on that information, we can pass in int Y position. We can handle the calculation from the shop system or from the shop script and just pass in the updated Y pose for where it needs to move. So once we've done that, update shop selection, all we have to do here is simply say selection image dot transform or rec transform. And if we read the tooltip on that, it will tell us how to use this. So here we have rec transform you can get. So I can't set the rec transform. So what I want to do though is I want to change the Y position of a rec transform. So let's Google search how we can do that. So let's open up Google. And let's search for change Y position of rect transform. And here we have rec transform anchored position, rec transform. Let's go to the scripting API for that. So looking through this, we have things like anchored position, the position of the pivot of this rect transform relative to the anchor reference point. We don't want to change that. We're looking for more so actual position, which would be the rectangle, local space of the transform. So here the label shows the current rect. Rect transform equals get component rect transform. And that is just fetching it, not actually changing it. So let's go ahead and check out some of the Google answers. And let's look at this. So how to move a rect transform position X through code. For us, it would be position Y. So here you can do rect transform.local position equals vector 3.0. I should have used this. Transform anchored position equals vector 3. It works now, but readers, let me know if it's still missing something. All right, so it says do not use local position. I was using this to change position for a character select, and it worked fine in editor, but not in my build. After tons of head scratching and reinstalling, it came down to anchored position instead of local. All right, so it wants us to use anchored position equals vector 3. So let's go and we'll experiment with that. So we can grab the rect transform anchored position and assign a new position. So let's try that. So here we can say selection image dot rect transform dot anchored position. And we can get and set that. So anchored position, and then here we can say equals a new vector 2. It's going to be a current X of whatever it is. We don't want to change the X, we just want to change the Y. So let's go ahead and say whatever the current X is. So we're going to say selection image dot rect transform dot anchored position dot X. And then for the Y, it's going to be whatever we pass in as the Y pose, which is those 3 different Y values. So let's go ahead and give this a try with just the first one. Let's go back into Unity and get the first value. Here we have our selection. We have our selection here. Let's up the sword, and let's go ahead and place it right about here. And it looks like some of these guys are a little disproportionate. So let's go ahead and just bring the boots of flight up a bit. Okay, there we go. All right, so for the current selection of the flame sword, we're going to go ahead and put it at 62. So what we're going to do here is in our shop, we know it's 62. So I can create a switch statement here. And we're going to switch between the item received from the inspector, the item ID. All right? Now, if it's case 0, that's the flame sword. So here, this is going to be case 0, flame sword. And then every case needs a break. Okay, so if it's the flame sword, what are we doing? Well, we are going to then say UI manager dot instance, and then here we're going to update the selection, update shop selection, and we're going to pass in a Y position. That Y position is going to be 62. If we save this and test it out, we should see that upon selecting the flame sword, it should update to that position. So let's go ahead and move this to look like it's already selected on Boots of Flight, and we'll test it out. Let's run the game. And if I select Flame Sword, you'll see here that it now flips to the Flame Sword. So it does look like it's selected. So let's go ahead and do the others. So for Boots of Flight, we'll say -39 is good for Boots of Flight. So that's going to be case 2. So here, if it passes in a 1, this is our boots. And we're going to say UI manager.instance.update shop selection. And we're going to pass in -39. Once we've done that, we can hit break. And then last but not least, we have our case 2, which is going to be our key to the castle. And then within that, we're going to say UI manager.instance.update shop selection. And let's find out what the selection is for that. So for the selection here, we're going to do keys to castle. And we'll say -152. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's hop back into Unity. and test this out. In the coming videos, we'll then work on the logic for actually handling the transaction of the sale. All right, so if I hit Flame Sword, where you have it selected, Boots of Flight, Keys to the Castle. So now we have a signifier that says, hey, which one are you interested in buying? Based on that logic, if I have this one selected, what we're going to do is when I hit the buy item, it's going to then handle the transaction for this sale. And it's going to handle all of the logic for if I'm able to even purchase this. Do I have enough money? And then also the system's going to need to know that this is the currently selected item and that's the one we want to buy. Because the last thing we want to happen is we don't want to have Flame Sword selected, but when I hit buy, it gives me a key to the castle. So we need to make sure that we're keeping track of the currently selected item. All right, guys, that wraps up this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.